The Galactic Council's central chamber defied the laws of conventional architecture. Suspended in the gravitational nexus of a decommissioned neutron star, the structure existed as much in quantum probability as in physical space. Massive crystalline panels shifted and realigned with each diplomatic breath, reflecting the moods and tensions of the gathered civilizations. Dr. Elena Rodriguez knew she was more than just a diplomat today. She was a firebreak, the single point between humanity's continued existence and total galactic ostracism. Her neural implant hummed softly, running constant threat assessments. The implant was a marvel of human bioengineering, a technology so advanced it made the Council's security systems look like primitive abacuses. Beneath her formal diplomatic attire, a carefully chosen suite of adaptive smart fabric that could instantly reconfigure for combat, diplomacy, or environmental protection, she carried 3 generations of survival technology. The chamber itself was a nightmare of diplomatic complexity. 17 different species occupy the primary council rings, each represented by beings that defied traditional biological understanding. The quantum collective from the Andromeda spiral sat as a shimmering cloud of entangled consciousness. The silicon monarchs of Rigel appeared as intricate geometric constructs of living metal. The biological concordance delegates were a writhing mass of symbiotic organisms that communicated through complex biochemical exchanges. And then there was humanity's delegation. Just her. The silence was supernatural, a carefully maintained acoustic field that allowed precise communication, while preventing any unauthorized sonic weapons or telepathic intrusions. Elena's fingers traced the edge of her communication tablet, its surface etched with quantum encryption patterns that would make most species' decryption algorithms weep. A holographic timer materialized in the chamber's central axis. 17,342 standard galactic cycles since the last time a species had been put on trial for systematic violation of interstellar protocols. The number felt like a weight, a reminder of the bureaucratic inertia that had maintained a carefully managed peace. Elena knew the real story was never about rules. It was about control. Her preliminary research had uncovered disturbing patterns. The Galactic Council wasn't just a diplomatic body. It was a sophisticated mechanism for maintaining a specific technological and cultural stasis. Humanity's crime wasn't violation of protocols. It was disruption of a carefully constructed system of managed evolution. The Jarai prosecutor materialized, not walked, but literally condensed from a quantum probability field. Krishak was more than a legal representative. He was a living archive, a crystalline being capable of storing and accessing the collective memories of entire civilizations. Each facet of his complex form held historical records, legal precedents, cultural nuances that spanned millennia. Humanity stands accused. Krishak's voice emerged simultaneously in 247 different linguistic and telepathic formats of systematic and calculated disruption of established galactic developmental protocols. Elena's neural implant began running predictive linguistic algorithms, analyzing every microsecond of the communication. The implant wasn't just translating, it was decoding the subtle quantum entanglements of interspecies communication, reading the unspoken layers beneath the words. A holographic display erupted around her, showing a rapid-fire sequence of human interventions. Medical teams treating plague-ridden colonies, engineering crews rebuilding ecosystem damage, diplomatic missions preventing genocidal conflicts. Each image was a potential charge, a potential condemnation. But Elena saw something else, a pattern. A strategy that no other species had ever conceived. The chamber's gravitational field subtly shifted. The crystalline panels realigned. Something was coming. A moment that would define not just humanity's future, but the future of galactic civilization itself. And Dr. Elena Rodriguez was ready. The prosecution's evidence materialized as a living tapestry of quantum-encoded memories. Kershak's crystalline form refracted light into intricate narratives, each beam a documented incident of human intervention. But this was no ordinary presentation. It was a multidimensional assault on humanity's reputation. Deep within the chamber, the biological concordance delegation began to pulse with an unsettling rhythm. Their symbiotic network, a collective consciousness that spanned multiple organic substrates, resonated with a mixture of fascination and genuine fear. They had studied humanity longer than most, and what they saw defied every known pattern of galactic civilization development. A holographic reconstruction emerged, showing the Kepler 442 bits incident. Humans had arrived on a pre-industrial world facing total ecological collapse. The native species, silicon-based life forms with a civilization teetering on the brink of extinction, had no concept of interstellar contact protocols. Traditional galactic doctrine demanded non-intervention, a careful preservation of natural developmental trajectories. Humans did something else entirely. Kershak's prosecution narrative unfolded with surgical precision. Holographic projections showed human intervention teams, not military, not purely scientific, but a hybrid force of ecological engineers, medical specialists, and cultural anthropologists. They didn't just save the planet. They fundamentally reimagined its potential. The silicon lifeforms of Kepler 442 bits had been locked in a centuries-long environmental degradation cycle. Their civilization's core technologies relied on extractive processes that were slowly destroying their planetary ecosystem. Human teams didn't just provide technological solutions. They worked alongside the native species, teaching collaborative problem-solving techniques that fundamentally altered their societal approach to resource management. Observe the contamination. Kershak's voice resonated. Systematic violation of the Non-Interference Directive, subsection 7.3, paragraph omega. But the holographic evidence told a different story. Where other civilizations would have observed, documented, and maintained clinical distance, humans had chosen active engagement. The silicon lifeforms population stabilized. Their technological development accelerated. Their collective consciousness expanded beyond mere survival into genuine exploration. The quantum collective's representative, a shimmering cloud of entangled consciousness, began to vibrate with increased complexity. Its quantum state suggested something between curiosity and genuine perturbation. Humanity's actions didn't just break rules. They challenged fundamental assumptions about civilizational development. Elena's neural implant was doing more than passive monitoring. It was actively parsing the multidimensional prosecution narrative, identifying quantum-level inconsistencies, tracking the subtle emotional resonances of each species present. The implant was a marvel of human adaptive technology, part communication device, part diplomatic sensor array, part survival mechanism. Kershak moved to the next incident, the medical intervention on the gas giant Pneumonine, where humanity had introduced a revolutionary nano-ecological restoration protocol. The native methane-based life forms had been experiencing a generational genetic collapse. Traditional galactic medical protocols suggested careful observation, potential quarantine, minimal intervention. Humans developed a complete genetic restoration technology in 17 standard cycles. The prosecution's narrative began to unravel. Each violation was simultaneously a solution, each disruption a pathway to unprecedented development. The Galactic Council's carefully maintained stasis was being challenged not through military might, but through a radical approach to problem-solving. The Silicon Monarchs of Rigel began to reconfigure their geometric configurations, a sign of deep computational recalculation. They were running millions of potential scenarios, trying to understand the underlying strategy of human interventions. Kershak's crystalline form flickered. For a millisecond, barely perceptible to most species, there was a moment of genuine uncertainty. Elena allowed herself the slightest smile. The real hearing was just beginning. The moment Elena activated her defense protocol, reality itself seemed to fracture. Her communication implant wasn't just a device. It was a quantum cryptographic masterpiece, designed by a team of human researchers who viewed technological limitations as mild suggestions. As streams of unfiltered data began to flood the Council's systems, The chamber's carefully maintained equilibrium dissolved into controlled chaos. Compressed data packets began to unravel, each containing layers of context that the Galactic Council's censorship algorithms had never anticipated. Personal logs, scientific research, emergency transmissions, but these were no ordinary records. They were living narratives, quantum-entangled memories that resisted traditional classification. A transmission from the Epsilon Eridani research outpost materialized, a holographic reconstruction of a first contact scenario that never made official reports. A human xenobiologist named Dr. Marcus Chen had encountered a nascent spacefaring civilization on the verge of self-destruction. Traditional protocols demanded observation, not intervention. Chen did something else entirely. The hologram showed Chen working alongside the alien species, not as a savior, but as a collaborative partner. He didn't introduce advanced technology. Instead, he shared problem-solving methodologies, collaborative research techniques, and a fundamental approach to collective survival that was utterly alien to the watching council members. The biological concordance delegation began to pulse with increased intensity. Their symbiotic network was parsing the data streams, finding patterns that defied their millennia-old understanding of interspecies interaction. Alina's attack was multi-layered. It wasn't just about presenting evidence. It was about rewriting the very language of diplomatic communication. Her implant began generating adaptive translation matrices that didn't just convert words. They translated entire conceptual frameworks. The Council's translation systems began to break down, unable to process the nuanced human approach to communication that treated language as a living, adaptive organism rather than a fixed set of rules. For 3 minutes, the most advanced communication network in the galaxy became a cacophony of unfiltered information. The Silicon monarchs of Rigel began to reconfigure their geometric forms, their living metallic structures struggling to process the incoming data. Each fragment of information was a challenge to their understanding of civilization, of progress, of potential. A transmission from the deep space research vessel Hawking materialized, showing how human scientists had developed a symbiotic communication protocol with a silicon-based life form that existed in the magnetic fields of a gas giant. No previous civilization had even recognized this entity as a potential form of intelligence. Humans not only communicated with it, but developed a collaborative research methodology that expanded both species' understanding of consciousness. Krishak's crystalline form began to show microscopic fractures. The living archive was processing information faster than its millennia-old systems were designed to handle. Alina wasn't just presenting a defense. She was conducting a systematic deconstruction of the Galactic Council's foundational assumptions. The quantum collective's consciousness began to shimmer with increased complexity. Their entangled state suggested something between terror and profound fascination. Humanity's approach to information, to interaction, to existence itself was so fundamentally different that it challenged the very notion of established protocols. A final data burst erupted, a compressed archive of human diplomatic and scientific interactions that would take conventional analysis systems decades to fully process. But Alina's implant was doing something else. It was creating a living narrative, a dynamic representation of human potential that couldn't be contained by traditional analytical frameworks. The chamber's gravitational field began to fluctuate. The crystalline panels that formed the council's structure started to resonate with the incoming information, reflecting a complexity that no single species had ever achieved. Krishak's voice emerged, momentarily stripped of its bureaucratic certainty. "What are you?" Alina smiled. The real conversation was just beginning. The moment of revelation came not from Alina, but from an unexpected source. A holographic projection materialized, not from the council's systems, but from a quantum-encrypted source that bypassed all existing security protocols. The image was a data ghost, a fragment of information so densely compressed that its very existence challenged the fundamental laws of information transfer. Dr. Arya Nakamura appeared. She had been presumed dead for decades, a legendary xenorchaeologist who had vanished while investigating the deep historical archives of the Galactic Council. Her appearance was a quantum echo, a message prepared decades in advance, triggered by a specific sequence of events that only Elena could initiate. "If you are seeing this," Nakamura's holographic form spoke, "the conspiracy is far deeper than anyone imagined." The chamber fell into absolute silence. Even the quantum collective's entangled consciousness seemed to freeze in anticipation. Nakamura's research revealed a systematic suppression of technological and cultural development across multiple civilizations. The Galactic Council wasn't just a diplomatic body. It was a carefully constructed mechanism of control designed to maintain a specific technological and social equilibrium that benefited a select group of elder civilizations. Holographic reconstructions began to unfold. Civilizations that had been on the brink of significant technological breakthroughs, suddenly experiencing catastrophic setbacks. Research facilities destroyed by natural disasters. Leading scientists disappearing under mysterious circumstances. Entire cultural archives systematically erased. The silicon monarchs of Rytal began to pulse with a deep, resonant frequency. Their geometric forms flickered, suggesting internal conflict. They recognized the patterns in Nakamura's evidence, patterns they had suspected but never could conclusively prove. Kershak's crystalline form began to fracture, not physically, but informationally. Each facet of his being was struggling to maintain the carefully constructed narrative that had defined galactic governance for millennia. Elena's neural implant was doing more than processing information. It was creating dynamic correlations, finding the quantum threads that connected seemingly disparate events. The suppression wasn't just about technological control. It was about maintaining the specific power structure that had existed for thousands of galactic cycles. Nakamura's final piece of evidence was most shocking. A complete archive of suppressed technological developments, each representing a potential evolutionary leap for various civilizations. Faster-than-light communication technologies, ecological restoration protocols, quantum consciousness transfer methods, all systematically buried, hidden from the civilizations that could have been transformed by their potential. The biological concordance began to pulse with a mixture of rage and profound sadness. Their symbiotic network was processing the implications, generations of potential growth, of evolutionary potential, deliberately stunted by a bureaucratic mechanism of control. Humanity was never the problem. Nakamura's hologram continued. Humanity was the unexpected variable. The civilization that refused to play by the established rules, that saw protocols as suggestions rather than absolute limits. Elena understood now. Their interventions weren't just acts of compassion or scientific curiosity. They were a systematic challenge to a deeply entrenched system of controlled evolution. The quantum encrypted transmission began to destabilize. Nakamura's final words were a challenge, a beacon of potential. The future belongs to those who can reimagine the possible. As the hologram dissolved, the chamber was left in a state of profound uncertainty. The carefully maintained illusion of galactic governance had been irreparably shattered. Kershak's voice emerged, stripped of its previous certainty. "What do we do now?" Elena met his gaze. The real negotiation was about to begin. The chamber's atmospheric composition began to shift imperceptibly. Most species wouldn't notice, but Elena's genetic modifications registered the change immediately. A subtle manipulation designed to induce cognitive suppression, a last-ditch diplomatic weapon rarely deployed in the Council's history. Her body was more than mere biology, a living testament to human adaptability. Elena carried the genetic legacy of the Proxima Colony Survival Initiative, a classified program born from humanity's most desperate moment of potential extinction. 37 years earlier, the Proxima Colony had been more than a settlement. It was humanity's first true extrasolar experiment in adaptive colonization. Located in a system characterized by extreme electromagnetic radiation and unpredictable quantum flux, the colony represented the bleeding edge of human survival technology. The attack came without warning, not from an external military force, but from a phenomenon that defied traditional understanding. A quantum-level cascade event that began to systematically deconstruct the colony's molecular integrity. Conventional shielding failed. Standard evacuation protocols became meaningless. Of 12,000 colonists, only 73 survived. Alina was 9 years old when it happened. The survival protocols implemented were beyond anything the galactic scientific community had ever witnessed. Rapid genetic recalibration, quantum-level neural restructuring, adaptive biological systems that could respond to environmental threats in microseconds. The children who survived weren't just modified. They were fundamentally reimagined as a new form of human existence. Her neural implant was more than a communication device. It was a living quantum computer, integrated so deeply into her biological systems that the line between technology and organic consciousness had become meaningfully blurred. A subsonic frequency began to emanate from her body, not intentionally, but as a natural response to the chamber's atmospheric manipulation. It was a communication technique developed through decades of interspecies research, a method of transferring complex informational states that transcended traditional linguistic barriers. The biological concordance began to react first. Their symbiotic network resonated with the frequency, experiencing something between communication and profound emotional response. They were witnessing a form of existence that challenged their most fundamental understanding of consciousness. Krishak's crystalline form began to refract light in unusual patterns. The living archive was experiencing something unprecedented, a living record that was actively resisting archival. Alina's genetic modifications allowed her to process information at levels that would overwhelm most biological systems. She could perceive quantum-level interactions, read the subtle electromagnetic signatures of emotional states, and generate communication matrices that existed between language and pure thought. The survival of Proxima Colony wasn't just a historical footnote. It was a blueprint for a new approach to existence. Where other species saw limitation, humans saw opportunity for radical transformation. Her body carried microscopic adaptive systems that could instantaneously respond to environmental threats. Radiation-resistant cellular structures, quantum-entangled neural networks, adaptive immune systems that could rewrite themselves in real time. The silicon monarchs of Rytal began to reconfigure their geometric forms, a sign of deep computational recalculation. They were trying to understand a being that existed simultaneously as an individual and as a complex adaptive system. Alina's memories flickered, not just her own, but the collective experiences of the Proxima survivors. Each modification, each adaptive technique was a story of survival, of pushing beyond previously understood limitations. When she spoke, it wasn't with words. It was with a complex informational state that existed between communication and pure potential. The chamber held its collective breath. This was more than a defense. This was a demonstration of what humanity could become. Krishak's final assault was nothing short of a quantum diplomatic weapon. A holographic reconstruction materialized, showing Alina's most controversial intervention, the Numar incident, a classified mission that had never officially entered any galactic records. The projection began to unfold a narrative designed to completely discredit humanity's diplomatic efforts. The Numar were a telepathic species existing in a complex symbiotic relationship with their planet's electromagnetic field. Conventional first contact protocols deemed them too fragile, too complex to approach. Their civilization balanced on the precipice of total ecological and cultural collapse. Alina's team had done something unprecedented. Instead of traditional diplomatic or technological intervention, they had engaged in a method of communication that defied every established protocol of interspecies interaction. The hologram showed fragments of the mission: quantum-entangled communication matrices, adaptive resonance fields, collaborative problem-solving techniques that didn't just bridge cultural differences, they reimagined the very concept of communication. But Krishak wasn't presenting this as a success. He was framing it as a violation. a reckless disregard for the delicate balance of an emerging civilization. What he didn't know was that Elena had anticipated this moment precisely. Her neural implant began to generate a counter-narrative, not through words, but through a complex informational state that existed between pure data and living memory. The chamber's quantum-sensitive panels began to resonate with the incoming information, creating a multi-dimensional representation of the Numar intervention. Layers of context began to unfold. The Numar weren't just saved. They were transformed. Their telepathic networks, previously limited by planetary constraints, had expanded into a truly interstellar consciousness. Their ecological systems, on the brink of total collapse, had been restored through a collaborative approach that merged human technological insight with the Numar's intrinsic planetary connection. The biological concordance began to pulse with an intensity that suggested something between terror and profound revelation. They were witnessing a method of intervention that didn't just solve problems, it reimagined potential. Kershak's crystalline form began to fracture, not physically, but informationally. Each attempt to present the Numar intervention as a violation revealed deeper layers of successful collaboration. Elena's counter-presentation was a masterpiece of informational warfare. She didn't just defend the intervention. She demonstrated how traditional galactic protocols were fundamentally limited, how they prevented the kind of transformative interactions that could genuinely advance civilizations. The Silicon monarchs of Rigel began to reconfigure their geometric forms. Their living computational matrix was processing the implications of this intervention at speeds that would have been impossible moments before. A subtle frequency began to emanate from Elena, a communication technique that existed between pure information and lived experience. It wasn't a defense. It was a challenge to the very foundations of galactic diplomatic understanding. The quantum collective's entangled consciousness began to shimmer with increased complexity. They were experiencing something beyond traditional observation, a living demonstration of a fundamentally different approach to interspecies interaction. Kershak's final piece of evidence became his own undoing. The more he tried to paint the Numar intervention as a violation, the more he revealed the profound limitations of the existing galactic governance system. Elena wasn't just defending humanity. She was demonstrating a new approach to civilization itself. The chamber fell into a profound silence. The carefully maintained illusion of diplomatic protocol had been irreparably challenged. Kershak's voice emerged, stripped of its previous certainty. "What are you proposing?" Elena met his gaze. The real negotiation was about to begin. Silence filled the chamber, a quantum-laden stillness that held more meaning than 1,000 spoken languages. Elena understood that words were insufficient. The phrase she was about to speak wasn't just a combination of linguistic symbols. It was a living construct, a complex informational matrix that would reshape the very fabric of galactic understanding. Her preparation began generations before this moment. The phrase was a culmination of research spanning multiple scientific disciplines, cultural anthropologies, and quantum communication theories. It had been crafted not by a single mind, but by a collective of human researchers who saw communication as a dynamic, living system. The phrase existed in a state of quantum superposition, simultaneously a diplomatic statement, a mathematical theorem, a cultural bridge, and a philosophical revelation. As Elena began to speak, the chamber's quantum-sensitive panels began to resonate. Each molecular structure in the room seemed to lean in, anticipating something beyond mere communication. The first layer was linguistic, a perfect synthesis of mathematical precision and emotional resonance, constructed to bypass traditional translation barriers. It contained embedded algorithmic structures that could dynamically reconfigure meaning based on the receiver's cognitive framework. The second layer was neurological. The phrase contained precise frequency modulations that could trigger specific cognitive pathways, creating a shared experiential understanding that transcended individual perception. The third layer was quantum computational. Embedded within the phrase were complex informational matrices that could simultaneously exist in multiple interpretative states, challenging the very notion of fixed meaning. The biological concordance began to pulse with an intensity that suggested something between ecstasy and profound existential transformation. Their symbiotic network was experiencing the phrase not as a communication, but as a living entity. The silicon monarchs of Rigel reconfigured their geometric forms, their living computational matrix struggling to process the multi-dimensional information construct. Kreshek's crystalline form began to vibrate at frequencies previously unknown to his species. The living archive was experiencing something beyond archival, a moment of genuine, transformative revelation. The quantum collective's entangled consciousness began to shimmer with increased complexity. They were witnessing a form of communication that existed between thought and pure potential. Elena's neural implant was more than a technological augmentation. It was a living bridge between human potential and cosmic understanding. The phrase emerged not from a single point of origin, but from a complex network of quantum-entangled consciousness. Each word carried multiple layers of meaning. Mathematical theorems were woven into cultural metaphors. Emotional resonances were structured with algorithmic precision. Philosophical concepts became tangible, living constructs. The phrase challenged fundamental assumptions about communication, about consciousness, about the very nature of understanding itself. It spoke of humanity's core truth, that limitation is an invitation to transformation, that survival is not about preservation, but about constant, dynamic evolution, that the universe is not a fixed system to be managed, but a living, collaborative potential waiting to be explored. Moments stretched into an eternity of understanding. The chamber's atmospheric composition began to subtly shift, not through technological manipulation, but through a fundamental recalibration of perceptual potential. Kreshek's voice emerged, transformed. "We hear you." But it was more than hearing. It was a complete reimagining of listening itself. Elena smiled. The conversation was just beginning. The transformation was not instantaneous. It was a cascading wave of fundamental reimagination. The Galactic Council's structure began to dissolve, not through destruction, but through a process of radical reconstruction. What had existed as a rigid bureaucratic mechanism for millennia now became a dynamic, adaptive network of collaborative potential. Representatives from various civilizations found themselves experiencing a collective epiphany. The barriers that had separated species, that had maintained carefully constructed hierarchies of technological and cultural development, began to lose their meaning. The first practical manifestation emerged from the most unexpected source. The Silicon Monarchs of Rytel proposed a comprehensive research initiative that would have been unthinkable moments before. A collaborative exploration program that would allow emerging civilizations direct access to accumulated knowledge, with the critical difference being true collaboration rather than managed development. The biological concordance began to reconfigure its own internal networks. Their symbiotic consciousness recognized that the human approach was not about technological superiority, but about a fundamental philosophy of interconnected potential. They started developing communication protocols that would allow for genuine cross-species understanding, moving beyond mere translation into true empathetic exchange. Quantum archives began to open. Centuries of suppressed research, hidden technological developments, and culturally sensitive information became accessible, not as a dump of raw data, but as a living, contextual network that could be engaged with dynamically. Elena found herself not as a conqueror, but as a bridge builder. The diplomatic role transformed from representation to facilitation, creating pathways for genuine understanding. The economic models that had maintained galactic stability began to shift. Resources were no longer viewed as finite commodities to be carefully managed and controlled, but as collaborative potential waiting to be explored. Trade became less about exchange and more about mutual development. Educational systems across multiple civilizations began to be reimagined. The focus moved from preservation of existing knowledge to dynamic exploration of potential. Learning became a collaborative, adaptive process that recognized the unique contributions of each species. Technological development protocols were completely restructured. The previous system of controlled advancement was replaced by an open-source approach that celebrated innovation while maintaining ethical considerations. Each civilization was encouraged to contribute its unique perspective, creating a truly collective approach to technological evolution. The most profound changes occurred in how civilizations perceived themselves and each other. The rigid hierarchies of technological development dissolved. An emerging civilization was no longer seen as something to be contained or managed, but as a potential collaborative partner with unique insights. Dr. Aria Nakamura's hidden archives became a foundational resource. Her decades of research, once considered dangerous and subversive, now formed the theoretical framework for a new approach to galactic governance. Krishak, the living archive that had initially prosecuted humanity, found himself transformed. The crystalline being became a key architect of the new collaborative framework, using his comprehensive historical knowledge not to restrict, but to facilitate understanding. The human approach, seeing limitations as invitations to transformation, became a fundamental galactic philosophy. It wasn't about human superiority, but about a radical approach to potential. Diplomatic missions became true cultural exchanges. Technology transfers were replaced by collaborative research initiatives. Each species was recognized not for its current capabilities, but for its potential to contribute to a larger, more complex understanding of existence. Belina understood that this was not an endpoint, but a beginning. The phrase she had spoken was not a solution, but an invitation, a challenge to continue exploring, to keep pushing the boundaries of understanding. The quantum collective's entangled consciousness resonated with a new frequency, one of anticipation, of genuine curiosity about what might come next. As the first collaborative initiatives began to take shape, it became clear that humanity's greatest contribution was not a specific technology or diplomatic strategy. It was a fundamental reimagining of what was possible. The Council Fire had become something else entirely, a beacon of collective potential.